break to allow Senator Roberts to ask some questions.
Yes, thank you, Senator Roberts. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for appearing today. Is the ABN important to an employee's payslip? And why is the employer's ABN on that payslip to its employees important?
Look, Senator Roberts, I'd have to take on notice exactly what the requirements are in the Fair Work regulations in relation to what must be listed on a payslip.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, and hopefully one of my team will get back to me and say whether or not that is actually a requirement. But certainly the identity of the employer is, my understanding is usually included on a payslip.
The identity of the employer.
Yes.
That's fundamental. So I'm not surprised there's such a morass of regulations that you can't answer that. Don't hold it against you. Thank you for your truth. Can a letter of offer or employment contract remove the compulsory employer legal obligations of the Fair Work Act, the National Employment Standards and applicable awards?
I think that's we don't know the answer to the first question, so we can't really answer the second.
Well, I would have thought the answer was fairly simple.
The payslip, basically.
No, the payslip. That's forget that for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
So, Senator, are you asking whether or not an employer can contract out of their legislative obligation?
Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is no.
No.
And the reg just is 3.461H.
Sorry?
I have that 3.461H.
For the payslips?
For the ABN number.
Okay, thank you. So it's required?
Yes, it is.
It is required, thank you. And it has to be the employer's ABN?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can a letter of offer or employment contract mislead the employee as to who the actual employer is?
So, Senator, what I would say is, look, we can't give legal advice in this forum in relation to particular matters, and as all lawyers always say, it will depend on the facts and circumstances, and so I can't give I guess an unqualified answer in the abstract without, I guess, a little bit more information about, the particular facts and circumstances, which is probably outside, I think, of the remit of today.
I appreciate that you've got to give a technically correct answer, but to me it would seem that, not looking for validation or verification, that a letter of offer of employment contract could not mislead an employer as to who the employee as to who their employer is.
Look, and what I would say is there is, you'd have to look at, obviously we regulate the Fair Work Act rather than common law, and there may well be some common law remedies that might be applicable, or indeed you might be able to rope in a particular contravention of the Fair Work Act depending on what the circumstances are. But I just can't give you an unqualified, it would really depend.
No, I appreciate that. As I said, you've got to give a technically correct answer. What are the qualifications needed for a Fair Work Ombudsman investigator? For example, a legal qualification such as a law degree needed? Probably would help, wouldn't it, with the morass of regulations?
They're not required, no. No, they're not, Senator, but we do require, very specific training. They need to be ongoing staff, for example. They can't be contractors.
Okay, what are the qualifications? They're fairly broad?
Yeah, so there's a mix of skill sets. Senator, that make up the group of our Fair Work inspectors, but the fundamental is a very robust and comprehensive training program that we put them through with respect to workplace relations knowledge and basics, and then the actual investigative process as well. So that's...
and they require security clearances too, so we need to check their character.
So they're more general life experience and ability to handle...
Potentially, yes.
Senator, over the journey, soft skills have been just as important as the ability to, hold your ground in difficult circumstances. So being able to diffuse a challenging circumstance through a human interacting with another human is a skill set we expect of people, but equally we need people that can know and apply the law in situ.
But there is a comprehensive training we provide them as well.
So you get people from a diverse backgrounds, bring them together, give them the training they need, so that it'd be fair to say, from what Mr Campbell said, that their people skills would be more important than their specific technical skills because you can train them.
Both.
It's both, Senator.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Okay.
You can't work in workplace relations without being able to consume and apply some reasonably, detailed statute.
Yeah, thank you. When a Fair Work Ombudsman investigator is carrying out an investigation into an employer for a possible breach of the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards, does the Fair Work Ombudsman investigator check the authenticity of the documents to be true and correct? And what checks and balances does the investigator take to verify all documents are true and correct? For example, how would the investigator check a PAYG summary that the employer has given the investigator?
Yeah.
Given the detail of that, Senator, we might get Mr Ronson to help you out. He's been doing this for a long time and he's been on many work sites.
Stephen Ronson, Executive Director of Enforcement. Senator, I think your question's going to how do we verify or validate what we receive?
To make sure what the employer gives you is accurate.
Yeah, so I think the first place to start, depending on how high you want to take this, is that it's an offence to provide any false or misleading records to the Fair Work Ombudsman. So to a certain degree, any employer who chooses to provide documentation that is not true or correct is obviously taking a risk. There is, of course, though, deliberate and then inadvertent provision of documentation. So back to your initial question, the answer is quite simple. The inspector, the Fair Work inspector, will request documentation in the course of an investigation. That's their whole job. They're sourcing evidence, not just from the employing entity, but a range of parties. And they will obviously caution all parties that they are to provide, true, correct information. If it's proven to be otherwise, then that becomes its own investigation, if you like.
Thank you. During an investigation, does a Fair Work Ombudsman investigator check the employer's ABN on employees' payslips and then cross-check that ABN on the payslip is the same as the ABN on the employer's submitted PAYG summary to the ATO?
Typically, that would be the case.
You do check it?
Yeah, ABNs are an important source of information for the inspector because it's, as I think where we're going with this questioning, is it determines who's the employing entity.
Thank you. It determines the employing entity. What are the penalties for an employer giving false and misleading documents to the Fair Work Ombudsman during an investigation into the breach of the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards? And has this happened before and has it been prosecuted by the Fair Work Ombudsman?
We have taken several cases since our inception to court where we have sought orders in relation to the provision of false and misleading documents. And then there are, without trying to complicate this, there are degrees of provision.
Deliberately misleading compared with accidental, for example.
Yeah.
So accidental would just be sloppy and slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
Okay. Does the Fair Work Ombudsman know what the dollar value is for a black coal award covered employee who worked a 4-panel roster, working 12.5-hour shifts, 7 days per week, including weekends, public holidays, night and day shifts, including all loadings for those shifts worked and 6 weeks annual leave, plus leave loading and paid sick leave?
A Fair Work inspector would be able to easily obtain that information through our own, which is also a public-facing tool, which is called PACT, which is a...
What is it called?
It's called PACT. P-A-C-T is the acronym. It's a pay and conditions tool calculator, but it contains every price point of every award for every contingency in Australia.
Okay. Have you, during an investigation into award payments versus an enterprise agreement, to check that an employer was meeting his legal obligations under the Fair Work Act?
Sorry, can you repeat that question again? Sorry, Senator.
I haven't said it very well. Have you calculated, during an investigation into award payments versus an enterprise agreement, have you checked that an employer was meeting their legal obligations under the Fair Work Act?
Oh, okay. So typically, the vast majority of investigations that we undertake relate to the award system. Enterprise agreements are a smaller proportion just because of numbers of our investigations, but we typically are an award-based inspectorate if you drill it down
But
to
you
that.
can do both.
Exactly. But if we are looking at a request for assistance or a complaint that relates to an enterprise agreement, we may or may not have to compare it with the award. The enterprise agreement typically stands on its own. It's been ratified and approved by the Fair Work Commission, and then we look to the terms initially of the enterprise agreement. If there is reference to an underlying instrument, the modern award, then of course we will examine that. But the enterprise agreement, by the very nature of the fact that it's been approved by the Fair Work Commission, is the primary industrial instrument governing the terms and conditions of employment.
Okay. So you're less likely to check under an enterprise agreement because of what it's been through.
Yeah, that's right.
Assuming...
The enterprise agreement stands on its own as a general rule. I'm just
Yep.
giving you some generalities here.
And that's on the assumption that it's been verified and stamped by the Fair Work Commission. So you rely on them?
Correct.
Okay. I must say, Chair, these answers are really quick and clean and very precise. So thank you. I really do appreciate that. Just get on to something here now that's got a little bit of uncertainty, and I'm nearly finished, Chair.
You've got 3 minutes, Senator. if that's-
Okay, well, I think that'll be fine. In the previous government, we've had this discussion, Ms Parker. In the previous government, Minister Christian Porter undertook to have an investigation into with me, undertook to have an investigation into the exploitation and abuse of Hunter Valley coal miners. What's going on with the casual miners, some of the casual miners, sorry, some of the labour hire casual miners. When Minister Porter was transferred and Minister Cash became Attorney General, I reminded her of this, and she said she didn't know, which I accept, which is fine. But she agreed with me that an investigation is needed into casual labour hire miners in the Hunter. And that was delayed, and I don't blame Senator Cash for that as Attorney General at the time. Yet her staff eventually discussed it with your people, I think, Fair Work, Ms Parker.
I believe it was mentioned. If I just raised it, I believe it was mentioned, but it never progressed. There was nothing yet.
No, I'm not chasing you. I'm
that's
just
fine.
putting facts in there, looking for a request in a minute, looking to a request. And now we've got a new government. What is the process for getting an investigation into the abuse of labour hire workers, casual workers in the Hunter Valley? Can we recommend something to you? Can we write to you like ANAO? Or?
Yeah, so Senator, it's depending on what you want investigated. Then I guess an option you have is to write to the minister, as you've done in the past, and seek that. In terms of where that would then be investigated from or reviewed, it would depend on the focus and what needs to be achieved. So, for example, if you were looking at an investigation that covers entirely about wages and entitlements, then Fair Work Ombudsman's role is that. But if you wanted to broaden that into work health safety matters or other broader matters, then that would be beyond our remit. If we were asked to do, whether we could do some sort of investigation, I would need to take account of our priorities. We set out annual priorities, and this area isn't one of those for this current year. And I would also have to consider resourcing. I would need additional resourcing to do something like that, which is quite a big piece of work that we're clearly not resourced for. So that would be the approach, but you would need to sort of, as I said, be very clear on exactly what you wanted to achieve, but I would suggest a discussion with the department as well around where might that sit, because they have very good relationships with other departments that might have a role in it, such as I said, work health and safety, workers' compensation, depending on where your interests lie.
So the minister cannot direct you because you are the Ombudsman. You're supposed to be separate, right?
The minister can direct. That needs to be then tabled in the Parliament.
Okay.
So but the minister, as I mentioned before, can ask us to look into things. As again, I would need to take account of we're a relatively small agency. We've got a pretty big remit. we have to prioritise. We can't go in every workplace. We can't look at everything. So we have to decide on the basis of requests for assistance, anonymous reports, where the intelligence lies. This is not a sector that we get very much. We get very few complaints from this sector. We have very little intelligence that there's issues. We know that, of course, we've worked with you and you've raised issues. But in terms of a systemic issue, we don't get very much at all.
So you work more on specifics. An individual worker has a problem, or an individual employer has a problem.
We can certainly help. We help a lot of individuals, as we've outlined in our annual report. If someone comes to us and has an underpayment issue, then we'll look into that. In terms of a broader sector investigation, that's a much bigger piece of work, and I'd need to consider all our other priorities as well. So, you know, we're working on vulnerable workers, migrant workers. We've got fast food restaurants and cafes as a priority. We're still working on large corporate sector matters, universities. We've got a very big workload. You know, everyone's fully utilised. You know, we're fully staffed. We've slightly overspent. Don't tell. But we. So you know, we.
On Hansard.
We're looking at that. But yeah, we'd need to look at it. We do get a lot of requests.
Senator Roberts, I appreciate that's time. If you have one very quick question.
No question, just clarifying. Specific requests for investigating pay and entitlements, fine. If it's broader, workers' comp, safety, go to the Minister.
Yes, and as I said, I don't like to be difficult. You can ask, but we'll have to.
No.
We will have to look at what we're able to achieve.
That's
in
fine.
The resources we have.
And I just reiterate how much I appreciate their responses.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. We'll now go on break. Return.